and other systems based upon our indigenous knowledge, our indigenous heritage, our indigenous worldviews, and our indigenous humanities. I think that, you know, all across the world we've heard of humanities, but it always referred to the Socrates, Plato kind of thinking. And we never thought about it in terms of indigenous humanities. That is what we have. It's not native studies per se, because then we get locked into something called the history of peoples and even some of the anthropological thinking about peoples. But rather, if we take it up from indigenous humanities, then we're taking it up as the animation of who we are. Now, we animate who we are through the arts, through our poetry, through our drama, through TV, our media productions. It is through our philosophy, it's our histories, it's our oral tradition, our literature, and so on. All these represent our indigenous humanities, and I'm thinking that what we need to really be building upon and getting our universities now to take up are the indigenous humanities as a whole. And the other part of that decolonizing methodologies has to do with generating reflective and meaningful transformations of theory and practice to heal the present and the past traumas that we've lived. So much of that our lives have been in trauma, from the boarding school days, relocation days, to the racism that we live in the cities. It is the kinds of schools that have been built around the punishment model, the reward benefit model, as opposed to the caring models that our own indigenous peoples had as a caring model of education. So we really need to go back to those particular foundations and try to rebuild new transformations of learning and education so that we can heal those wounds and that cell memory from the past. And also, we need to develop a culture of inclusiveness and generation of change to change those power hierarchy arrangements that we are now living with. That, in particular, is one of the major ways that, that we must look to all of our allies to help to build an awareness of how we need to move out of the power over relationship and developing more equitable dialogical models of learning and of shared development. I call these things my approach in terms of the work that I do has been built around these two things, a two-pronged research project of deconstruction and reconstruction. Now, on the deconstruction end, I am talking about us taking apart and understanding Eurocentrism and colonialism and racism and so on, that these are the kinds of things that when we begin to take it apart and recognize the privileges that people have gained only by virtue of their color, then we can begin to realize that people have real merits and they have knowledge and they need to be able to contribute that knowledge to a shared sustainable humanity. But in so doing, we cannot do it without reconstructing. So reconstructing means us going back and recognizing that our learning came from within our families. When our families were healed, when our communities were in a good situation, that there were foundations of knowledge that were embedded in those communities. And if we go back to those elders and people who remember that time and the knowledge that was passed on to them about good ways of living. In fact, when we think about our education, the elders call it things like imatsuin, which is good living, good life. Now, what was good living and good life all about? And those kinds of foundations of those philosophies, we really need to reinscribe back into our schools about how to treat each other and to make policies and practices that really deal with the ways in which we can treat each other in a good way. So I'm aware, however, that we have been all marinated in Eurocentrism. This little, as I gave a talk some few years ago. There was a woman in the audience, and she shared with me, her name is Diane Ray, she shared with me after she left that this image, and I asked her if I might use it again, and she has allowed me to use it, but it is hers of knowing, and what came to mind when I talked about how we were all marinated in Eurocentrism. That very few of us, and I think even among the elders today, they have had some schooling. They have had maybe minimal schooling, but they've had some schooling. And they've also had to live under a structure of power under Indian Affairs or INAC in Canada or BIA in the States, under some kind of regime. And in that regime, the notions of superiority and inferiority have been part of that whole relationship. And so, yes, we have been marinated in that kind of thinking, and some of us are still part of that thinking, and that are not even aware of how we carry in our cell memory those Eurocentric thoughts and practices of superiority and inferiority. And one of the things that that part of that Eurocentrism brings about is notions of cognitive imperialism. In the year of 1984, I was, actually before that, I was working with, I can't even remember his name now, I used to know, Martin Carnoy. Martin Carnoy was one of my professors who did a book on cultural imperialism. And I said, no, it's not cultural imperialism where you look at all the cultural things. I said, it's cognitive imperialism. You hit me in the head, you whitewashed my brain, you took everything. And you took that by virtue of the language that was taken from us as a people. And that is cognitive imperialism. And that's what we're having to live with and also have to work through. And so as students, as researchers, we are all then victims and beneficiaries of that same kind of system. That Eurocentrism isn't something like a negative attitude that somehow we can, by virtue of going through some kind of workshop, sort of have taken away from us and somehow we come reborn out of it. There is not any way to do that because Eurocentric ideas are part of our scholarship, it's part of law, it's part of policy, it's part of practice, it's part of how institutions put themselves together, how they create merit and meritocracy and so on, are all part of those similar foundations. And so there's very few of us that have not had that kind of different notions that are other than that, although some of our elders in our communities have long tried to sort of rid themselves of that kind of thinking and to renew themselves within their own cultural traditions, indigenous ways of being, their ceremonies, and so on. And it's through them, as we've been hearing over and over again, that we are finding the gems of lights of truth coming through to us that help us to begin to move into new directions. We also then, as a result, then must be critical learners and critical recognizing that every one of us who have been subjected to Eurocentric ways of knowing and thinking then must also be healed by that. We need to become aware of the thinking that has created that kind of hierarchical power over relationship, and with that begin to heal ourselves and begin to develop more equitable relations with each other, more shared, global, reciprocal relationships built upon respect. And those are sort of some of the foundations, again, of the indigenous traditions in which some of our communities have long held on to. And so decolonizing research then must be engaged for the survival of indigenous knowledge and languages and heritage. Now I come to my ethics espionable. Now espionable, in 1999, when we took these notions to our elders in our community, to the Grand Council of Mi'kmaq, they heard us, listened to us, and then assigned a group of people in the community to begin to work together to find out or to come to some decision about the issues around protection of indigenous knowledge. And a year of our doing literature reviews and talking with each other by phone, by email, and having meetings in the community with various elders and others, at the end of the year, we came up